Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Source Material Podcast. I'm Chris Armstrong, in for Jesse Starcher tonight for our look at Batman Creature of the Night. I have turned on the bat signal, and who has answered the call? First, we have Al Sedano. How goes it, Al?
Pretty good. How you doing tonight?
Hanging in there. Not too bad so far.
That's all we can hope for right now.
Exactly. Exactly. We've also got Evan Bevins on the call tonight. How are you?
I'm doing okay. And if being introduced second makes me Robin, I just want to specify that I am a Robin that wears pants.
So not the fun Robin.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Oh.
So, wait, is that Dick, Carey, or Jason?
I said I wasn't going to go through all these, but we'll do just this one. Who's your favorite Robin, Evan?
Oh, man, you asked me too quick. Probably Tim Drake, because of Young Justice. I wanted to come up with something really off the wall, but by the time I was reading Batman comics, Tim Drake was Robin, and Dick Grayson was Nightwing, and Jason Todd was the guy we didn't talk about much.
Yeah, I kind of wish we were still in that zone, but that's neither here nor there, I guess. What about you, Al? Favorite Robin?
I'm just going to say real quick, because it's going to come up in the question you're going to ask us in a minute, but yeah, it's Tim.
Cool. Yeah, Tim is my favorite Robin, too, but my favorite character that has ever been Robin would be Nightwing. Dick Grayson, I like Nightwing quite a bit, but as far as just Robins, I'm definitely a Tim Drake guy. But
yeah, Damian has his moments.
I liked Damian a lot at the beginning. He sometimes can be a little, he's supposed to be annoying, I guess.
Yeah.
But sometimes he's a little too much. But yeah, in general, I like Damian quite a bit too.
Yeah, I especially liked him when Morrison was writing Dick Grayson as Batman. So you had the smiling Batman and the scowling Robin. That was a fun little mix-up, that little switch-up.
Well, we got Batman Creature of the Night from Kurt Busiek and John Paul Leon. So just briefly, let's go over our history with the Batman character. And I'll just start out, the first big memory of Batman I really have, even before Batman 66, is of course, the Batman movie in 1989. I was 9 years old the summer that came out, and I really don't even I remember when I was out and it was a big deal, and my friends had seen it and were making a big deal of it. I always had it in my head that I didn't care, I didn't want to see Batman. I thought it looked dumb or whatever. And I was a little kid, so I was pretty much a prime target for it. So I'm not sure why I thought that. It might have just been a contrarian, even at that early of an age, and was like, I don't care about that. But eventually I did go see it in a movie theater with some friends and loved it. And, they did a quick turnaround on the VHS home video release that year. So I got it for the VHS for Christmas and watched it over and over. And I wasn't even reading comics at that point. So a few years later, once I did get into comics, Batman was one I was going to gravitate to, obviously. And I've kind of been a consistent Batman reader pretty much since the early 90s. I'm not reading a Batman comic every month, or I'm not following a monthly Batman comic at all times, but I've got hundreds of Batman comics in my collection. I've always got at least an eye on what's going on with the Batman stuff, but not one of my favorites. My favorites tend to be even a little bit more obscure characters, which I've talked about on other podcasts, like Darkhawk, Prime, Badrock, stuff like that. But as far as the big main superheroes like Spider-Man, Superman, the Avengers characters, Batman's pretty high up on my list. I'm a fan. What about you guys? Al, how about you? How far back do you go with Batman?
Well, Batman, the character itself in general, my first things remembering it would be Super Friends. And then, of course, reruns of the Batman TV show, especially around 89 when the movie was coming out. And
was that the first time it was widely, other than when it was on air initially? It wasn't a thing really until the movie came out, right?
It depends where, because remember, back at that point, it's not like you're going to get the same thing on every channel for everybody. You had so many, local channels. Because I've heard some people talking about growing up earlier years that they had the TV show that was on and reruns for them. So I think it depends where you were.
Huh.
But for me, I was in the New York area. At least I don't remember it being on reruns until around that time period because of the movie. And of course, I saw the movie, which I loved, and it still is. Maybe it's nostalgia more, but it's still my favorite live-action Batman. And I had already been reading comics, but I wasn't really reading Batman, and that's when I started picking up some. So my first Batman issue was issue 442, which is the last part, for anyone who knows, the last part of A Lonely Place of Dying, which is Tim Drake's first appearance in the costume.
Cool.
The original costume. So that's why Tim's my favorite Robin. I started reading Batman right when Tim Drake was becoming a concern. And I read that whole thing for years of him training and learning and then becoming Robin. And I stopped reading somewhere from less than a year before Nightfall. And Batman, like a lot of, I think I might mention this for the Spider-Man when we talk about that. Those characters like Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, I go back and forth in them because they're eventually just going to go bring everything back to status quo and start over with a new story again with a new writer. So I can't really stay with them long term, but I pop back and forth, if it's something that looks interesting. I really like the Greg Rucka run and Detective and Morrison stuff. So, cool. Yeah, that's my history.
What about you, Evan?
Well, once again, I feel like I'm copying off Al, but I think my first Batman experience was on Super Friends, or was there a slightly different version when Darkseid was the main antagonist?
Yeah, the cartoon changed every few years. Like the first few years, it was the original characters with, I think it was Wendy and Marvin were first, and then they left, and it was the Wonder Twins, and then they became more of, I think it was called Superpowers to tie in with the toys, and that's when you had Cyborg and Firestorm and Darkseid was there.
Okay, yeah, that was the version, and one that always stuck with me was they did one that focused heavily on Batman's origin in Crime Alley, so I knew that even before I read many Batman comics. So, and I mean, I would always go and grab comics like at either Walden Books or a local flea market and things like that. So I got some Batman here and there, watched the movies and everything, but probably the first time I regularly bought a Batman comic, I picked up some Nightfall stuff here and there because I figured, if the death of Superman was going to make me rich, then, this would set my kids up too. But probably the first time I actually actively collected Batman was not until the Jeff Loeb, Jim Lee Hush storyline.
I'm a big fan of Hush.
The regularly reading Batman probably happened more with Morrison's JLA, because that's just one of the best Batman out there.
Oh yeah, I love that run.
What about the Batman '89 movie? You're the only one who hasn't mentioned that yet. Did you go see that?
I mean, I liked it at the time. It didn't age well for me. I mean, I still have I've got the DVD with the Burton and Schumacher ones just for nostalgia's sake. I mean, like I always say, it's funny now. There's so much comic book stuff on that there are shows and movies that I think I would probably like that I've just never gotten around to watching. Whereas when I was younger, you took anything you could get. That's why I watched Return of Swamp Thing so many times. That's why I have a fondness for the animated Iron Man series, which is basically Masters of the Universe for Marvel. So yeah, I mean, there's a part of me that always loved the Burton ones and even the Schumacher ones to a certain extent, but I more prefer the slightly less murdery Batman we get in the Christopher Nolan movies.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, yeah, that was huge at the time. I mean, I even remember an issue of Fantastic Four where Ben Grimm went to watch the Batman movie.
But yeah, no, it's true. At the time, we took what we could get. I mean, you were thrilled to watch the Generation X TV movie.
Yes, I was.
And you would have watched it again if they had it on, because that's all there was.
and the David Hasselhoff Nick Fury.
I've still never seen that.
Well, I mean, in fairness, as a kid who grew up on Knight Rider, I was thrilled to watch the David Hasselhoff anything. I mean, I even watched a few episodes of Baywatch Nights. So,
hey, Baywatch Nights was pretty sick.
I have to take your word for it.
I mean, it was basically Baywatch X-Files style. But yeah, the Burton Batman movies, I like Burton's kind of the style he has in a lot of his movies anyway. Batman Returns have a lot of problems with the first Batman. I still like. It's definitely not like the Batman from the comics or whatever, but whether it's nostalgia or whatever, I still can watch that movie and it's pretty entertaining. I don't like Batman Returns much at all, but it is supremely weird, like even more so than the first Batman. For that reason, I can watch it every once in a while.
This isn't like that Spider-Man trade where we were shaming you for liking it. I mean,
Yeah.
No, I legitimately do not like Batman Returns.
Oh, see, I like that.
But I do appreciate elements of it, so I'll watch it every once in a while.
Michelle Pfeiffer and her performance might be a big reason why I like that one. She's just amazing in that movie.
Yeah, that's and I mean, Danny DeVito's good in it. Like the performances even in that movie, pretty much across the board, are enjoyable. It's just some of the weirder stuff. Like I would be uncomfortable watching that movie with my parents now. Like, not because there's like any sexual, overtly sexual stuff, but like there's so much like sexual innuendo. And then like I had sent Evan some screenshots of, I rewatched it on Christmas about 5 years ago, and I kind of like live tweeted,
because it is a Christmas movie.
It is a Christmas movie,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I mean, he just sets a guy on fire and then drives away with him burning to death, and it's like that's maybe a step too far for Batman.
Maybe.
But I digress.
Random side note: that's the first movie I ever saw with Christopher Walken.
Probably me too. I
Possible, yeah.
For the longest time, I thought of Christopher Walken as that guy from Batman Returns.
It's either going to be... Wait, what year did True Romance come out?
That was 93, so it would have been before that.
Okay, then. So, yeah, Batman Returns might be my first Walken movie.
All right, well, let's shift gears back to...
the actual topic.
The comic, I guess. So this is Kurt Busiek and John Paul Leon. I'm a big Kurt Busiek fan. He's probably my favorite comic book writer. Ed Brubaker's in there. I think those are probably the only two candidates as far as maybe Jeff Johns, but probably not. He's probably not up in the same league as those two, I don't think, for me personally. So that's one of the reasons I picked this. I had read Superman Secret Identity recently, which is one of the I always see that in the lists of like the top 10 Superman stories, but I never read it, even though I'm a big Kurt Busiek fan. So maybe 6 months ago, I bought the trade, and then a few months later, I finally got around to reading it, and I liked it. It's good. I think it was a victim of being overhyped, maybe because I remember when it came out, and the plot was basically, this is a guy named Clark Kent, a kid named Clark Kent, and then one day he wakes up and he has Superman's powers. And I just thought that was really silly, and I just thought the idea was kind of dumb, so I didn't give it much thought. And then I kept seeing and hearing about it in magazines and on websites and stuff about how great it was. So, I guess 15 years later, however long it's been since that came out, I finally read it recently. And it was good. I think I was expecting it to be a little bit better, but I did like it. It was Busiek and Stuart Immonen did that. So I think, Evan, you said you had read that in the past?
Yeah, I read it closer to when it came out. I had kind of the same initial reaction to Astro City. I kept hearing how great it was. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'm a Marvel and DC guy. And then I finally got around to reading Astro City, and I was like, oh my gosh, they didn't hype it enough. It was amazing. That's the one that Busiek's been writing for, 25 years now for different publishers. It's just fantastic. But I really liked Secret Identity. I know it was based on that old, and I think it was a Superman annual that they did a story about a kid in the real world named Clark Kent. And I think he grew up to become Superboy Prime. So whatever you want to do with that. But
yeah, I should actually point out too that Superman Secret Identity, this is not a character named Clark Kent in the DC universe who gets Superman's power. Just like a kid in the real world where superpowers don't exist. Superman is a fictional character, and then he develops powers, because his name is Clark Kent or whatever. But just wanted to make that distinction for anybody who may be listening that doesn't realize exactly where we're going with it.
But yeah, the Secret Identity, I remember being very impressed with. I looked up some stuff about it and realized I'd forgotten a lot of details, so I may need to go back and reread it. But reading or rereading a Kurt Busiek comic is never a bad idea. So,
sidebar on that Astro City, I'd never read that going back to, I think, 2004. I was going to meet a friend who lived in Chicago to go to Wizard World Chicago Con.
Mm-hmm.
I was taking a train there. So I went to my local comic shop and got some trades to read on the way up there. And I'd never read Astro City, so I got the first volume of that. And I loved it. And so that was 16 years ago. And I've never read any other Astro City comics, even though I'm a big, Busiek fan, like I said earlier. But I think it's because I tried to track down some of the trades, pretty soon after that, and they weren't in like this proper reading order.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to get the single issues. I've never done it. I think I'm just going to break down and get the trades, or I think they might even be on Hoopla.
Yeah. Some of them are. I read almost all of the original. I mean, like I said, I went through 2 or 3 publishers, run through the library, and then I came to the last one was broken into 2 parts, and I could not find the second part, and I still haven't tracked that one down. I've been buying single issues here and there, and I stumbled on the Tarnished Angel, which is a lot of people's favorites, for like $2 at at a place a couple years ago, but he relaunched it with DC through Vertigo, and I got all those issues. And I mean, it's just, I mean, the least interesting issue of Astro City is just so rich and so much more rewarding than like 90% of the comics that I've read.
Yeah. What about you, Al? You know, you had never read Secret Identity, right?
No, I at least I don't think so. I don't remember. I might. When did it come out?
I want to say like 2002 or 3.
There is a chance then I might have, because I think I might have still been working at the comic store at the time, so in which case I picked up most things.
Yeah, it was a 4-issue prestige format.
It's pretty good chance. I just don't recall it at all.
Yeah.
You might have forgotten it due to some sort of crisis.
There have been several of those. So.
True, but I did read Astro City. I did pick up Astro City from the beginning for at least the first few years. And yeah, it is a great book. Unfortunately, I did not so much drop it, but budget concerns had to stop getting a lot of things. It's one of the things I want to get. Either I'll have to get digital, or maybe that's something that's worth actually getting like trades or hardcovers of at some point, because there's some great stories in there. Astro City is really worth reading.
Yeah, I'm ashamed being a big fan of Busiek that I've only ever read that first trade, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, I think if you ever read the half issue, which came out from Wizard, it's like I think it's one of like the greatest single issue stories ever.
Huh. And those half issues are usually only like 12 pages, right?
Oh yeah, it's still so great a story.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he, the last arc on the Vertigo run was kind of a sequel to that.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it was the same. I won't spoil too much, but the guy that had the support group, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, it was the guy who the crisis was like a backstory that stuff got lost. Yeah,
he did like 4 issues focusing on that guy to end the Vertigo run.
I definitely need to get back into it.
Well, speaking of Busiek, real quick, for the creative team for this issue, Busiek, I go pretty far back with him. His Avengers run is one of my favorite runs of comics ever, which I've kind of blabbed about on a different podcast. But and as we talked about Astro City and whatnot, anything else specifically you guys want to bring up for Busiek?
Oh man, you'll edit the long pause out because I love Kurt Busiek, but I'm just Avengers is where I really got to know and read him. But I'm kind of drawing a blank, but I've checked out so many things that he's done just because his name's on it.
I think Marvels was probably the first thing he wrote that I read, which I was more the art than the story, although I appreciate both obviously now. But yeah, that was the first big thing, and then it seemed like there were several years between that and Avengers, which is when I really became aware of. Which around that time when Marvels came out, I wasn't really paying attention to who was writing stuff.
Yeah,
I was 12 or 13, but as I got older, started to pay attention to creative teams.
And I forgot he did Thunderbolts, which I loved too, especially that first couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was going to mention. But I mean, he's just done so many things, and I mean, I even stumbled on. I was at some kind of like mass yard sale, and some guy was selling a bunch of comics for $0.25 a piece, and I found something called like Aerosmith that Busiek wrote, and I'm like, well, it's Busiek, let's go.
Yeah, that was so good. And Tooth and Claw, which is a more recent Image series he did. I read the first few issues of that. That was good. Of course, JLA Avengers.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and he did JLA after Morrison and Mark Waid, and actually made JLA Avengers canon, at least until DC rewrote its continuity for the 18th time. But there's a reference in one of his storylines that makes JLA Avengers canon.
Yep.
Yeah, and he's like, Avengers Forever, we covered that about a year ago. I think Al was on for that one.
I love that series. That's one of my favorite minis.
And that really shows some would maybe not say it's a strength, but for like comic nerds, it is kind of a strength to show his reverence for the material and the continuity. Anytime you see him on Twitter, interacting with people, he's good about interacting with fans, and you can just tell he's got like an encyclopedic knowledge of like Marvel and DC continuity. Mark Waid's another guy that's kind of like that, and they really respect the stories that came before and all that. And Avengers Forever is a great example of that. What about the artist, John Paul Leon? I looked him up actually because I knew his name, but I couldn't remember if I had read anything that he had actually done the art in. And all I really found were a couple of I think there was an issue of Ex Machina that he did, which I'm sure I read because I've read 80% of that series. But I'm not all that familiar with him outside of just a few issues of like fill-in issues I think that he had done on stuff that I'd read. But I was blown away with his art in this book. You guys are familiar at all with him before this?
Oh yeah. My main thing I know him from was Earth X with Alex Ross.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I've read that, so I didn't see that in his. when I Googled him, I didn't see that on there. So yeah,
well,
okay.
Neither did I, but yeah, no, I double checked to make sure, but that's him.
Yeah, he is, because I was doing the same thing. I was looking him up, and once I read that he did Earth X, I remembered that. So I wasn't, when I first started this, I wasn't too keen on the art, but I mean, after I read it for a little bit, I'm like, no, this guy is the perfect artist for this story. I mean, you know, I like when they mix, you know, the realism with the comic bookish, and he doesn't do it quite the way some of my other favorites do it, but I mean, yeah, it was. I tend to focus more on the writers than the artist, but. Mm-hmm. I just thought his art was the perfect tone and everything for this story.
Agreed.
Yeah, no, his style definitely fits this type of story. This more or less trying to be a real world. I mean, obviously it's not. And well, it's not anyway because it's a comic book.
Right,
you know,
right.
It's a story. It's a work of fiction. No matter what, it can't be the real world.
This is a book that just wrapped up recently, and as I finished it earlier today, I looked through some of the back matter. I noticed that Busiek had a section with his original pitch for the series, which he actually did 15 years ago, right off the heels of Superman Secret Identity, which we talked about earlier. Yeah, as this is kind of a spiritual sequel to that. And for different reasons, it just never got off the ground until last year. And apparently, I knew that there was like some scheduling lags. I knew that it didn't come out on time, but I didn't realize it was 4 issues, and apparently between issues 1 and 4, over a year passed. So they were really behind on some of these issues. I wanted to check out some of the stuff from that pitch, his original pitch, but I didn't get a chance to look over that before I actually had to start doing the synopsis and everything. But so this is a recent comic, just wrapped up earlier this year. I believe issue 4 came out. So
oh wow, I didn't realize that recent.
Yeah, I mean the first issue I think was early 2019. And then I think issue 4 dropped maybe in February. Like I think it was like right before COVID hit even. Oh, wow. I remember seeing issue 4 at the comic shop, and I was like, man, shouldn't that have been out a long time ago? But I digress. So.
Sorry, I did have one thing to say because it was bothering me, so I had to check. View to a Kill and The Dead Zone were my first walk-ins. Not Batman Returns. It was bothering me. Like I had seen Walken before that, so I checked and I saw both those movies beforehand. Plus Bloxy Blues. I saw that in the theater, so I know I saw 3 movies of him in it before that one. So, but
I just like to say I would love to see him do a like road trip documentary on country music called "Walking in Memphis."
Oh Lord!
Just had to get that off my chest.
I appreciate it. All right, Batman, Creature of the Night from DC Comics, written by Kurt Busiek, art by John Paul Leon. Young Batman fan Bruce Wainwright and his parents walk in on an armed intruder robbing their home. Bruce witnesses his parents' murder before being shot himself. He survives and is soon experiencing vivid dreams of a Batman-like creature attacking criminals all over Boston. Realizing he can actually influence this creature, he sends it on a quest to find his parents' killer. Once this is accomplished, he uses his Dark Avenger to fight crime while he grows up to be a wealthy businessman. When he realizes some of the creature's actions are dishonorable, he decides he has to find out where this monster comes from. Bruce's uncle tells him he had a twin stillborn, leading him to believe this Batman is his brother's spirit. As Bruce gets older, the line between he and the creature gets thinner and thinner as Bruce's grip on reality falters. With the aid of his own Robin, Bruce is able to come back from the edge. All right, so those are very broad strokes. There's a lot of stuff in here that I didn't touch on at all because, quite frankly, it's almost 200 pages, and breaking it down into a synopsis was going to be pretty difficult. So just what are your initial thoughts, Evan?
I was hooked. From the beginning, I knew that he was working on this. I'd read some stuff here and there that Busiek was working on this, but I didn't really know what the tone would be. I had it in my head that this was going to be a kid whose parents got shot and killed, and he decided to be like Batman. I did not expect the supernatural element. I mean, right off the bat, you get the robbery, which is creepy and heartbreaking and, not at all cheesy in the parallels to the Batman origin or anything. And then you have that, I'm trying to find it here, but the first indication where he blacks out and then he can see this reflection somewhere and it says safe, you safe. And that creeped me out. I'm like, okay, this is not what I was expecting at all. It was, but by the end of the first issue, I'm like, okay, I have no idea where this is going. And like I said, if it's Kurt Busiek, I'm usually, already anticipating good things. So I was hooked from the get go.
What about you, Al? How did you like the opening salvo here?
Well, it's my turn to copy. I really kind of
Yes.
expected it to be similar to what you said, that it was going to be this kid whose parents were killed, named Bruce Wayne, or in this case, Bruce Wainwright, and he was using Batman as a guide or inspiration, whether he tried to, quote unquote, fight crime or just, live a normal life, but use other ways to help, but inspired by Batman. I was not expecting the supernatural part until that happened. And even then at the beginning, I thought that was going to be hallucination or imagination until I was like, oh, this is really happening here. And then I was wondering where, so then I'm like, oh, this is going somewhere completely different than what I was expecting. And it was pretty interesting and, pretty fascinating what they did with it. So I was hooked. It grabbed me. I wasn't sure if I was going to like this or not. I was kind of worried it was going to be kind of a little more boring. And it was definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in the same boat as you guys. I was, I had read Secret Identity, but I knew going into that there was going to be stuff with superpowers and whatnot. Given that this was kind of associated with Batman, a character who doesn't have superpowers or isn't supernatural or anything like that, I just assumed, it was going to be something that was really grounded in reality. And yeah, it is grounded in reality in the fact that Busiek really gets you into the headspace of the main characters. He's kind of got it's almost like a dual narrative in the beginning anyway, or at least a dual inner monologue between Bruce Wainwright and his uncle Alfred, which I forget his uncle's actual name.
Alton Frederick Jepson.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. Bruce is kind of able to turn that into Alfred because he's a Batman fan and whatnot. And then there's other characters. There's an Officer Gordon. Evan, I'm relying on you again for Gordon's last name.
Gordon, was it? I want to say Hoover.
That sounds right. So yeah, so Bruce, he likes Batman. His name is Bruce Wainwright, so he's able to kind of think of himself as Bruce Wayne. He's got an Uncle Alfred, and he's got this association with the Officer Gordon at the police station after his parents, murder and everything. So he's constantly grabbing onto these things, trying to associate himself with the Batman mythos that he's a fan of. And I just thought that was a cool trick. There's a Robin later on down the line as he gets older. And I thought that was a pretty creative use of tying those characters in with this Bruce Wayne.
And he takes those elements and, after a while you think you know where they're going, and then he kind of throws you these curveballs with them. Like I can't remember if it was the second or the third issue where we find out more about Officer Hoover, about Gordon.
Oh yeah.
But he definitely does not turn out to be Commissioner Gordon in the ways that you expect. And he becomes a wealthy playboy, Bruce does. And so you think, okay, well, his life's just going like Batman. And then, it sets you up for different things. Like the Robin character is so important, but she never becomes like a sidekick. It's a different role she plays. And so it's cool how he takes all these familiar elements and you think you know where they're going, and some of them turn out like you expect, and then some of them veer away, but he brings it all back to a story about, some of the fundamental elements of Batman.
Yeah, and even the things that, like you said, there's some things like him becoming playboy and wealthy, and you think, oh, okay, well, he's at least, he has some skills, he's, good at business, and then you find out exactly how was able to get all the money. And it wasn't intentional, but, when I first read that and I saw like all these lucky things happening to him that he was able to get them, make profit off of it, I was suspicious. And then they kept going on with it. I'm like, oh, well, I guess it was just good luck. And then you find out that no, the Batman spirit was trying to keep him so safe, but it doesn't understand. So it was basically setting things up so he would profit. I mean, there's sabotaging other companies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I put in my notes, you could do a whole, limited series or whatever just on the idea of, if you actually had these abilities, how they would work. And, if you could make your wishes come true, would that really be, what you wanted? And there's that. And then there's the whole thing about, the grief and the anguish and wanting to control the world. I mean, there's material here for 2 or 3 or more really interesting stories, and it's all woven together here.
And I also did like the use of actually changing time, because it starts in the late 60s and it at least goes for at least 30 years.
Yeah.
So at least goes until the late 90s, if not later.
Right.
There's even a Tim Burton Batman poster early on in issue 3.
Yeah. They reference the movie, so you know that it's right in the heart of 89 or 90. You can see when he's in college, it looks like it's late 70s. You just see by the style of clothes and everything.
Yeah. And also one thing I noticed is you can see in that first issue when because it's Halloween that his parents are killed, the old style, horrible, crappy costumes they used to have for kids, where he has a Batman costume. It's it looks like, Adam West's face in the mask with a rubber band holding it on. And the shirt just has the bat symbol and it says Batman, because they all wrote the name on the chest. So whatever you were wearing, it was written on the chest.
Period authentic.
And it was probably super flammable too.
But yeah, as the story progresses, you reference to that Bruce eventually discovers that the creature is, planting evidence to basically sabotage other people and in an effort to benefit Bruce and take care of him. And the images of him like attacking the criminals are just like horrific. When the creature, like, he's always leaving him a bloody mess. He's got, basically vicious claws. I'm really impressed with. He almost looks a little bit like the version of Batman that Scarecrow sees in Batman Begins when he has like the fear serum.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking it looks kind of like the image of like what Batman is always trying to portray as.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then sometimes when you get a close look at the creature's face, it looks almost panther-like. Sometimes it's almost dog-like. It almost seems like he's using different animals to like maybe to show different kind of emotions that the creature's going through or something. Because there are some times when he almost looks like almost like a Great Dane in a couple of images, and then there's a few images where he looks more cat-like. So I was really impressed by the way he kind of switched it up and the kind of the variety of looks that he has. Yeah,
the way he looks just made me think of actually the 89 Batman movie. In the beginning, if you remember the Ali Knox character, when he's talking to, I think he's talking to Gordon trying to get a quote, and he's saying, they say he's 8 feet tall. They say he can't be killed. They say he drinks blood. Because like that's what this guy looks like. He looks like all the rumors about Batman. He's not human. He's an animal.
Right.
So I did Leon did a great job with this. I mean, not just the character designs, but the Batman design. And also, like we said, with the time difference, he had to then draw all these different periods. He couldn't just draw, quote unquote, Gotham City. He had to draw Boston in the 60s and then the 70s and then in the 80s, and the styles and the clothing and everything. So must have taken a lot of research.
That might be, he in the back matter, when he talked about the delays, he didn't specify like if it was the art that was taking a while or if there's some kind of publishing conflict. It may have just been that Leon was putting so much effort and detail into everything. It might have been, part of the reason for the delays. I wouldn't be surprised at all. It wouldn't be the first time that kind of thing had happened.
They didn't really get into what caused the delays. I don't know that.
I know Busiek has had some medical issues over the years that have caused some of his series to be delayed as well. I don't know if he's had them more recently, because this is, like you said, only like the last year or so. But that's also a potential factor. It could be both.
Yeah. I had that in my head that was part of it, but I wasn't sure. But I know I think he was talking about on Twitter, they've optioned Astro City for a TV show, so he's been doing some work with that. Like they stopped Astro City with Vertigo, and they're going to start releasing it as original graphic novels. And so there were some shifts in that, and I don't know if it was the TV show specifically, but I know he had some things that were kind of changing up his schedule. So, but yeah, the back matter doesn't really get into the specifics of that. It just kind of thanks people for sticking with the story.
Yeah,
and gives an idea of how it started and how it evolved, which is always really cool to see.
Well, as we shifted towards the latter part of the series, Evan, you want to expound a little bit on Officer Gordon and what we find out about him?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where we found that out, but it was he Bruce gets to working with him more, and he and this Gordon, like Jim Gordon, gets to relying on Batman to do things that the police can't do on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, Bruce gets curious about some things and starts pulling at some threads, and eventually finds out that Gordon. Yeah, it was in issue 3 where they start really working closer together, and there's some things that aren't quite right, and he eventually finds out that Gordon was using him and Batman not necessarily on innocent people, but to kind of take out the competition.
Mm-hmm.
That he was on the take, and it was just even though obviously Jim Gordon is a good cop and an upstanding guy, it still kind of felt like that tone with Batman. This just he gives everything, and it still doesn't quite work. He does all this stuff, and Gotham's still never safe. And it was just like this kick in the gut where he finds out, like, okay, I wasn't sure what to do with this. I channeled it in. I channeled this power that I have, this ability to help people, and it all went wrong. And it just that kind of feels like par for the course for Batman. Like, hey, I'm giving my all, and humanity still sucks.
Well, yeah, because actually I was thinking about that, and yes, I can understand Busiek was maybe trying to be a little, like, quote unquote realistic in that a Batman wouldn't solve all the problems. But there's also two differences. One, he is not a trained detective.
Yes.
So let's just go with that. He's not a trained detective. Now, he's learned a bit, and obviously has that ability of being able to see through Batman's eyes, so he can go places that he wouldn't be able to normally go and find out things. But he's not a trained detective, so doesn't have that ability. The other thing is this, like you said, because with Batman, crime hasn't stopped. It's not like Batman has saved Gotham from the fact that there is still crime. Forgetting the supervillains, there's still crime there.
Yeah.
But
he's just lowered the mortality rate a bit.
Yeah, but because of the crime rate. Not crime rate. Because of reboots and, reality restructuring, Batman really is only doing this for like 10 years or so, usually. He's actually doing this for 30. So, there's also a difference in the fact that Batman doesn't have time to act, except for, like, maybe if you're doing, like a Dark Knight Returns story or something like that, an alternate future where you see Batman having done this for like 30, 40 years. Batman's only been doing this for several years, maybe 10, 15 years tops, usually in any continuity, before it gets rebooted. This kid's been doing this for like 30 years since he was a kid too. So of course he's getting that feeling because he doesn't have the luxury of being rebooted and starting over again at 18. It sucks for him that way.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm sure that's probably why every time they have Batman retire, if they do an alternate future, it's because of that. He never gets anywhere. He actually is very much like Batman.
Yeah. Also, like, issue 3 is also the one where he starts to really delve into where his Batman came from. And again, another way that Busiek kind of incorporates the elements of the Batman comics is it turns out that his twin brother would have been named Thomas, which of course is comic book Batman's dad's name, but also he was Batman. Thomas Wayne was Batman in Flashpoint, and then I still haven't gotten caught up on Tom King's run, which I have enjoyed for the most part, but somehow Thomas Wayne Batman is in the main DC reality and is a villain. And so it wasn't paralleling that, but it was neat you've got another Batman, a darker Batman named Thomas, and maybe he's not the force for good that you expect him to be. So I thought that was kind of a cool another way to play on the Batman mythos, but still make the story his own.
Yeah, sure. And as things kind of devolve for Bruce, he learns that he had a twin brother, and he gets some information. There's like an occult studies professor that he interviews at a college. Basically, he's desperate to figure out what this thing is because he has a little bit of control over it, but doesn't know where it came from. And so he kind of goes through some different theories, folklore, and stuff like that as far as what this manifestation may be coming from. And then eventually he finds out about his brother, being stillborn. So it's never like confirmed that that's what's going on, but I think it's alluded to, and I think it's probably pretty much what Busiek was intending to point out. But as he kind of devolves towards the end, Bruce becomes more and more like the creature. Like one point, you see like when he's talking to one of the other characters, his eyes start to glow red. I think it's actually Robin that he's talking to.
Yeah, it's toward the end of issue 3.
Yeah, and it almost seems like they've become, he almost seems like he's becoming the creature himself towards the end. And then as he I'm trying to find where he was put on the medication.
That's in issue 4.
That's early in issue 4.
Because I'm looking at the first few pages, and in issue 4, she's finding him in his office trashed, and he just walks out of his office, jumps off the balcony off the skyscraper, and basically the Batman is covering him.
Okay, yeah.
So he's basically inside of it now. At that point, they're just, he's actively doing the things with it.
So he basically at that point has become Batman, the Batman creature. But the more he kind of gives himself over to that, the more he loses his grip on reality. He's starting to hallucinate and see, the Joker and other Batman characters and stuff like that. So in a way, like towards the end, it seems Busiek was showing you a little more of. I mean, I'm not a mental health professional or anything, but like it seems like he's kind of trying to show you like what kind of they go through when they're not on their medication and stuff like that, and kind of the struggles that can be. That's at least how I kind of was reading it, even though it's like obviously a fictional story. And I was still on the fence on whether or not he was imagining some of this stuff, the stuff with the creature. I mean,
well, it's interesting. Because, you do have this stuff that should be impossible, and then you have stuff that he's clearly hallucinating. So it's like, okay, where do you draw the line?
Right, exactly.
If it wasn't for the fact of other people saying things, you could still wonder how much of it is hallucination. But when Gordon knows about it, or when Robin talks about seeing him with the creature, obviously,
right, it's
real then. At least as far as I'm concerned, yeah, it is real because other people are seeing it too.
And you start to get an idea that, I through most of this, I was thinking, okay, well, he can manifest this bat creature or his twin that was never born, whatever. But you start to realize as it goes on that he's doing a lot more. I didn't notice it until I was going back just now, but even toward the end of issue 3, his mood starts to affect the weather and things like that. And it's very explicit in issue 4, but there's hints at it even before that it's not just, he's not just changing himself or affecting things in a small area around this spirit that, he can, mess with matter or reality or whatever it is he's doing at a much bigger level than we thought.
Yeah, he essentially conjures like a tornado or a whirlwind towards the end when he's kind of having that breakdown right before Robin shows up. I'd forgotten about the weather changes that had happened earlier until just now when you mentioned it.
I had to. Sometimes symbolism has to hit me over the head a little bit. Like I was thinking in my notes, I was like, so is the idea that Batman in the real world would be futile? And Busiek went into a little more in his original pitch that it was the idea that, and I think there was a story, and I haven't read it, but a friend of mine told me about it. There was a one shot like in the 80s with Batman and Hugo Strange, where Hugo Strange goes on TV and explains that, Batman is clearly someone who suffered a great trauma as a child because, dressing up as a bat and beating up criminals is a child's response to crime. And that's kind of what Busiek said he was going for here is, it's, not the idea so much of becoming Batman, but of controlling things and wanting the world to make sense was kind of the point of the story. And, once I read that, I'm like, well, yeah, of course. But before it took me, like I said, sometimes things fly over my head a little bit. So
I think this is something that could benefit from a reread. I think it just feels like something that you would get more out of the more times you go over it and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it could easily have been just with all the stuff they pack into it. This could have been like a 12-issue series. I don't think it should have been,
right.
But I mean, because a lot of times, and I think we may have talked about this before on another one, but sometimes it seems like stories get stretched out too much, or sometimes they cram a little too much in. And this one, I think there was definitely more material, but that they could have done, but they didn't stretch it out. They packed it with stuff, but it's not so busy that you can't follow it and pick up on stuff. And yeah, I think reading it again would definitely. We've just been talking about the stuff we just jumped back and looked at, finding stuff that we didn't notice the first time through. So, it's definitely loaded, but very well balanced, I think.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a nice balance of compression. It's not too decompressed and it's not too compressed either. because I mean it does cover like we said 30 something years in these 4 issues, so there is a lot of time skipped. Yeah. But I mean,
I don't feel
we
like
need
there's
to know
anything where I was like, oh hey, I wish they would have. I mean, there's places they could have done more, but there's not stuff where
wasn't
I was
necessary.
like, well, I really felt like they gave this, they didn't give this enough attention.
Yeah, nothing was really necessary. We didn't need to see every mission he did with Gordon, or
Right.
different Gordon before finding out. We saw enough. We don't need 12 issues showing 12 different cases. That's just milking it. This is very impressive. I was very impressed with this.
All right. Well, before we close it out, you guys have any final thoughts? Anything left out that you guys wanted to bring up before we close it out? Evan?
I think it's cool. You talked about how this was pitched almost immediately after Secret Identity. And, it's cool that they didn't say, oh, well, it didn't come together. Let's grab somebody else to do this. And it's also good that they didn't, 15 years later, someone said, hey, what about that project? Instead of going, well, yeah, Secret Identity, that was so 2004. They had a story. They had a good story. They kept the right guy on it. And when they were able to make it, they did it, and it didn't, Batman's always in vogue or whatever. There wasn't really a need, to rush this out to capitalize on it or to time it. They just had a good story. They had the right writer who eventually came back around to it. And in some of the back matter, he talked about what John Paul Leon brought to the table and how he enhanced the story and everything. So, they had the right creative team and they told the story when it was ready. Now, that said, part of me is going, I wonder if he's going to write a story about a kid named Arthur who finds out he can talk to fish. And, as terrible an idea as that sounds, if Kurt Busiek did it, I'd be there to read it.
No doubt.
About a kid named Barry that likes to run.
But yeah, I think, the logical next step would be a Wonder Woman to fill out the Trinity, I guess. But maybe another 15 years before we see another example of this. The only other thing I wanted to kind of point out was I like the use of the old school comic pages. Leon threw those in throughout the issue. Like, if, for example, when he was putting the pieces together about Gordon, there was a page done in the 70s. I would say, I guess that's not Neil Adams. Who was the 70s Batman artist?
Well, Neil Adams is one of them, or Marshall Rogers, maybe.
I guess I'm thinking more of Aparo, or Aparo.
Yeah, Jim Aparo. That's it.
Yeah, but anyway, it's this 70s looking style with the Batman in the blue and gray costume, and he confronts Gordon on the rooftop by the bat signal, and he pulls off a mask, and it's a Joker. That was probably, I think, my favorite example of those pages. But he sprinkles those out throughout as Bruce is processing stuff. He's seeing things through these old school Batman done in the art style of the era that he's thinking of. But
yeah,
final thoughts.
Well, as I said, the one of those I really liked is as the years have gone by and he started to forget his parents' faces, and he's imagining them as Thomas and Martha Wayne, because he can remember that, but he can't remember his parents' faces because they're fading.
What a downer.
This was one thing I really liked about this whole thing was the use of the how this secret is kind of destroying him a bit. Mm-hmm. Because he's in this. Because it's weird. Because it's not really a mental illness in the fact that he's not imagining this. It's really happening. But it's still affecting him like one because he can't really tell anybody, and it's not really because it's not a real world thing as far as most people know. This is a supernatural event. He's dealing with a ghost.
And he tries to conjure the creature at one point to show his uncle, and it doesn't work, so it makes him look even worse.
Yeah, and he's also then once he realizes it's even affecting him, then he starts also having issues like, will this make him go away? Will this kill my brother? What will happen to him? So there's a lot of intense emotions going for that, and I really like the end of the whole thing when his brother basically gives him the pills.
Yeah, that was he nails Busiek nails all the emotion in this.
Yeah, and it makes sense. His brother would have a very stunted emotional ability because he really never lived.
Right.
So that was just it's definitely worth a reread. Yeah, I'm gonna have to reread this at some point.
Yeah, you really nailed it on the head with the thing that makes this so effective is the emotional investment that Busiek forces you kind of into, because you really care about all these characters, and he gives them all distinct personalities. And Robin comes in towards the end as kind of she kind of takes over for Alfred as the other narrator through most of the last issue. I mean, it's like an intense drama, with these supernatural elements to it.
Dark Shadows guest starring Batman.
But yeah, you guys got anything else?
That's everything I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, we probably could go longer because there's a lot of meat on the bone for these 4 issues.
Oh yeah. If we want to dive into anything specific, I could dive into.
But yeah, I guess that'll do it. Al, where can people find you?
Resurrections, an Adam Warlock and Thanos podcast, which is about Adam Warlock and Thanos, and some other general Marvel cosmic type stuff. Just type in Adam Warlock or Thanos, whatever podcatcher you use, because it'll pop up. And you can also find me on Twitter at AdamThanosPod.
Awesome. What about you, Evan?
Well, you can go to Webtoons and check out Support Group. It's a webcomic about a support group for people with lame superpowers. In case you don't have the origin the comics say you will. I write it, Nathan Arnold draws it, and if you want to see why I don't draw it, you can follow me on Twitter at Evan_Bevins and see my 17 now Free Willy sequel movie posters I drew in junior high and see why I gravitated toward writing. Also occasionally find me live tweeting a random movie or informing you of the first names of Star Wars characters you didn't know and probably didn't care about.
Sweet. Well, I'm Chris Armstrong. You can find me on Twitter at BrodyMan34. I also do a podcast with Jesse and occasionally Evan or Al called Unspoken Issues, where we cover 90s comics one issue at a time. So you can check that out also on the Radicalcan Broadcasting Network feed as well. But yeah, that'll do it for this episode of Source Material. Big thanks to Al and Evan, and also to Jesse for letting me take over again this week, and also to the Radicalcan Broadcasting Network and W2M Network for hosting the podcast. Be sure to subscribe to those on whatever podcatcher you prefer. Y'all be safe out there. We'll see you next time.